police officer was patrolling the park, looking for someone to flex his authority on. He spotted a man sitting alone on a bench, too calm, too still, an easy target, or so he thought. Without hesitation, the officer approached, his baton ready, thinking he was about to put this stranger in his place. But what he didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Seconds later, reality hit him like a freight train. He had messed with the wrong person. Watch what happens next, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share the video, and drop a comment letting us know what city you're watching from. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and warm asphalt. Officer Dan Cross exhaled sharply through his nose, irritation bubbling just beneath the surface. This was the moment when people usually looked up, recognized his authority, and did as they were told. But not this time. The old man on the bench didn't even flinch, as if Cross wasn't even there. That wasn't going to fly. Cross shifted his weight, clearing his throat, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. But Chuck Norris, he didn't react. Didn't move. Didn't even acknowledge the officer's presence. His hand stayed steady, casually tossing another handful of birdseed to the pavement. The pigeons fluttered, pecking at the ground, completely oblivious to the tension growing between the two men. For the first time in a long time, Cross's presence alone wasn't enough. And he didn't like it. He stepped closer, his polished boot stopping just inches from Chuck's foot. His fingers instinctively flexed toward his baton. He had no patience for defiance, especially not from some old man who thought he could ignore the law. The afternoon sun cast longer shadows, the hum of the city distant, the park still alive with laughter and joggers. But right here, in this small circle of space, the air had changed, charged, heavy, like the calm before a storm. Cross stood over Chuck, radiating authority. His voice was sharp, demanding compliance, but the old man didn't move. Didn't even shift on the bench. He just sat there, dropping another handful of birdseed like Cross wasn't even worth his attention. That was it. Enough was enough. With a sharp motion, Cross lifted his baton and slammed it against the wooden bench, inches from Chuck's leg. The loud crack echoed through the air, sending a few startled birds into a flurry of wings. A few people glanced over at the noise, but after a second, they went back to their conversations, their walks, their day. Chuck? He didn't even blink. Cross's patience snapped. His voice, sharper now, louder, cut through the air. He was used to obedience. He expected it. He demanded it. But the old man just reached up, slow and deliberate, shifting his hat slightly, just enough for Cross to see the shadowed outline of his face. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't submission. It was something else entirely. Something that made the hair on Cross's arms stand up. His jaw tightened. His gut twisted in a way he didn't like. But he wasn't about to back down. Not now. With an impatient huff, he reached forward, grabbing Chuck's shoulder, his grip firm, meant to be commanding. But the second his fingers made contact, something shifted. The old man's muscles were solid, far more solid than Cross expected from someone who looked like he should have been enjoying retirement. And then, before he even realized what was happening, his own wrist was caught. Not fast. Not violent. Just smooth. Controlled. And utterly unshakable. That's when it hit him. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Effortless. That was the only way to describe it. Officer Cross barely had time to react before the pressure on his wrist increased, not enough to hurt, just enough to send a message. A clear, undeniable message. A shock of alarm shot through his chest, primal and immediate. He had faced resistance before, suspects who ran, men who fought back in wild, panicked desperation. But this was different. This was the grip of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. For the first time, Cross's confidence faltered. He yanked his arm back, and to his relief, the old man let go. His wrist wasn't injured, but he could still feel the weight of that grip, lingering like an imprint burned into his nerves. He stepped back, inhaling sharply. That wasn't supposed to happen. No. He wasn't about to let some old man make him look weak. His baton was still in his other hand, and this time there would be no warning. No more games. He adjusted his grip, raising the weapon with full intent. This time, it wasn't going to hit a bench. It was going to hit its mark. He swung. And missed. Chuck had barely moved. A shift of weight, a turn of the shoulder, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. But it was enough. The baton cut through empty air, missing completely, and before Cross could even process what was happening, his wrist was caught again. But this time, there was no hesitation. In one seamless motion, the baton was removed from his grip. Not yanked. Not wrestled away. Just taken. Cross's heart pounded. His training, his years of hand-to-hand combat experience, none of it mattered. His weapon had been stripped from him like a toy from a child. And the worst part? The old man didn't even use it. He didn't raise it, didn't threaten. He just held it. Waited in his hand for a moment, as if deciding whether it was even worth keeping. Then, slowly, deliberately, he let it drop. The baton clattered to the ground between them. Worthless. Cross stared at it, his breath uneven. The air between them had shifted, and he knew, deep down, this wasn't just some random old guy feeding pigeons in the park. The badge, the uniform, the authority he relied on, it all meant nothing here. A few people had noticed. Their whispers drifted through the air, cautious, uncertain. Teenagers exchanged glances, murmuring. Others simply watched, sensing that something far bigger was happening. Cross's hands curled into fists. His pride burned hot, anger and something worse, something he refused to name. He had one option left. The one thing that couldn't be taken from him so easily. His fingers twitched toward his holster. Chuck Norris was already watching. The baton lay forgotten between them, a useless piece of wood and metal. Moments ago, it had been a symbol of control. Now, it was nothing. Cross stood frozen. His breath came shallow, uneven. Around him, the murmurs grew. More people had stopped. More eyes were watching. The tension in the air thickened. But he barely noticed any of it. All he could focus on was the old man in front of him. The way he had taken the baton, not aggressively, not forcefully, just effortlessly. Like it wasn't even a challenge. Like it never had been. And then, just as easily, he had let it go. Not because he was surrendering, but because he didn't need it. Cross's fingers twitched at his side. His entire body burned. Not just with frustration, but with something deeper. Something dangerous. He had to do something. Had to win. His pulse pounded in his ears. His hand moved. His fingers curled around the grip of his service weapon. The last line of control. The final word in any confrontation. And yet, his movement slowed. A thought cut through the haze of anger, sharp and unwanted. This wasn't a street fight. This wasn't some punk looking to make a name for himself. Something was wrong. Cross had been a cop for nearly 15 years. He had faced angry drunks, cornered criminals, desperate men with nothing to lose. He had dealt with resistance before. But this wasn't resistance. This was something else entirely. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure what to do next. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? He had been in dangerous situations before. Had drawn his gun more times than he cared to count. But this was different. The man in front of him wasn't reacting the way people normally did. No fear. No tension. No telltale shift in stance, no subtle preparation for a fight. Just stillness. An unshakable calm that made the air feel heavier, like something inevitable was about to happen. And then Cross met his eyes. For the first time, he truly saw the old man. Sharp, unblinking, steady. No malice, no arrogance, no smugness. Just watching, waiting. A strange sensation crawled up Cross's spine, something dangerously close to doubt. His grip on the gun slackened slightly. A bead of sweat slid down his neck. The world around them faded. The park, the trees, the people. None of it mattered. There was only the heat of the sun on his face, the sound of his own breathing, and those eyes. A voice in his head, quiet but insistent, whispered, "Don't do it." But pride was a dangerous thing. His fingers tightened on the grip, and in a single, fluid motion, he drew his weapon. Before he could even lift it, something changed. The old man moved. Later, Cross would struggle to explain what happened next. He would try to replay it in his mind, to break it down into steps, but the truth was, there were no steps. There was only one moment. 1 second, the gun was in his hand. The next, his wrist was caught. Not yanked. Not twisted. Just stopped. Frozen. Locked in place by something stronger than force, control. And just like that, just as effortlessly as before, the gun was no longer his. It was gone. His own weapon. The thing that had always given him the upper hand. The one thing that made sure he was never the one at a disadvantage. Now, it rested in the calloused hands of the man in front of him. Cross stood there, stunned. His hand still hovered uselessly in the air, fingers curled around nothing. The crowd had noticed now. A murmur rippled through them. Someone gasped. A low curse cut through the air. The weight of 100 eyes pressed against him, heavier than any physical blow. Chuck Norris turned the gun over once in his hand, examining it, not as a threat, not with any urgency. Just testing it. And then, with the same deliberate motion as before, he bent down, placed the gun on the ground beside the baton, and straightened. He didn't need to say anything. He didn't have to. Cross swallowed, his throat dry. The realization settled over him like a thick fog. He had lost. Completely. And he hadn't even seen it coming. His feet felt rooted to the ground. His mind, sluggish, struggling to process a reality that didn't fit into the framework of his world. He had trained for years to control, to subdue, to win. But this was something else. A deeper, more humiliating defeat. And the worst part? The old man had never even thrown a punch. Cross's hands clenched into fists. His pride burned, shame and fury twisting together in his chest. The murmurs around him grew louder, filling the space, suffocating him. Then he saw it. A phone. Someone was recording. His stomach dropped. This wasn't just an embarrassment. This was evidence. And if that video made its way online, no, he wouldn't let it end like this. Something inside him snapped. His body moved before his mind could stop it, driven by anger, by desperation. He lunged. A last, reckless attempt to reclaim his authority. But Chuck Norris had already seen it coming. The moment stretched thin, heavy with inevitability. Cross moved. But the decision had already been made, before his muscles had even tensed. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't skill. It was desperation. A drowning man grasping at anything to pull himself back from the abyss. But desperation is never a substitute for precision. And precision? Precision was something Chuck Norris had spent a lifetime mastering. Cross never saw what happened next. Not in a way he could fully understand. One moment, he was moving. The next, his world shifted. His forward momentum disappeared. His body twisted, redirected by something impossibly fast, impossibly controlled. His own wrist, was caught, twisted, not with pain, not with brute force, but with perfection. His knees buckled. For the briefest moment, he was weightless. His vision tilted. And then, the world turned upside down. 1 second, Officer Cross was standing. The next, he was on the ground. No harsh impact. No brutal crash against the pavement. No pain. No injury. Just movement. A transition so smooth it barely felt real. One moment, he had control. The next, he was staring up at the sky. For a long moment, he didn't understand. The murmurs around him grew louder, creeping in from the edges of his consciousness. He heard them, registered the gasps, the whispered disbelief, but it all felt distant. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, his mind clawing at explanations that refused to form. Then, reality crashed in. He had been taken down. Effortlessly. Without a single wasted motion. Without violence. Without anger. Just efficiency. And he had lost. The shame came first, hot and suffocating, settling into his stomach like a lead weight. Then came the panic. He had lost control. And worse, people had seen it. Not just a few passers-by. A crowd. Their numbers were growing by the second, drawn in by the undeniable magnetism of what had just unfolded. And some were holding up phones. Screens glinted in the sunlight. The realization struck him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just humiliation. This was exposure. His pulse pounded in his skull as he fought to sit up, to reclaim even a fraction of his authority. But before he could move, a shadow passed over him. Chuck Norris stood above him. His expression? Unreadable. No smugness. No gloating. No trace of satisfaction. Just calm. Watching. Waiting. And that was when Cross understood something that sent an even deeper chill through his body. The old man had held back. Not because of hesitation. Not because of luck. But because he had chosen to. There had been no struggle. No contest of strength. Chuck had decided how this was going to end. Long before Cross had even drawn his gun. The weight of that realization was unbearable. Cross's jaw clenched as he scrambled to his feet, his body tense with frustration. He knew better than to attack again. He knew there was no recovering from this. But pride? Pride was a stubborn thing. He could feel the eyes on him. The silent judgment pressing against him like a crushing force. He had to do something. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them. 2 more officers. Cutting through the crowd. They were moving fast, hands near their holsters, their faces a mix of confusion and alertness. They had seen the commotion from a distance. And now, they were closing in. Relief surged through Cross's chest. This was it. His moment to take back control. With deliberate force, he straightened his uniform, ignoring how unsteady his body still felt. He turned sharply to face them, his jaw tight, pulse racing. Before they could ask questions, before they could process what had just happened, Cross pointed a rigid finger at Chuck Norris. He assaulted an officer. His voice was sharp. Authoritative. I want him in cuffs, now. The words were his last weapon. His final, desperate attempt to rewrite the story before it was taken from him completely. For a moment, the approaching officers hesitated. They had seen something. Maybe not everything. But enough to know that this situation wasn't as simple as Cross wanted it to be. Their eyes flicked between him and the old man. Taking in the body language. The silence. The undeniable weight of what had just unfolded. Then, one of them, an older officer with graying temples and tired eyes, froze mid-step. Recognition flickered across his face. Not at Cross. At Chuck Norris. And then, everything changed. His posture shifted. His hand moved away from his holster, and his gaze, though still sharp, held something new. Something close to understanding. He knew who Chuck Norris was. And in that instant, so did the other officer. Neither of them moved for their cuffs. Neither reached for their weapons. They just stood there, exchanging a glance that spoke more than words ever could. Cross felt his stomach twist. Something was slipping from his grasp. Something more than just control. The narrative, the one he had been trying to force, was unraveling before his eyes. His hands clenched into fists. His mind raced. But then, the senior officer spoke. Dan. Just his name. Nothing more. But the tone, the weight behind it, stopped Cross cold. And the hush that followed? Deafening. In that moment, he knew. He hadn't just lost a fight. He hadn't just lost his authority. He had lost something bigger. And as the realization settled over him, as the quiet judgment of his peers surrounded him, he felt the last shreds of his confidence fracture. Chuck Norris had never needed to throw a single punch. The truth had been enough. And now, the entire park was silent. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something weightier. A realization. One that everyone in that crowd felt. Something undeniable. And for Officer Dan Cross? Finality. Officer Dan Cross stood rigid, his body locked in the tense posture of a man who refused to acknowledge what was happening, even as it unfolded around him. His mind worked furiously, grasping for something, some foothold, some way to reverse what had already slipped irreversibly from his grasp. But the truth was undeniable. The control he had once wielded so effortlessly? Gone. The senior officer took a step forward. Older than Cross. His face lined with the wear of too many years on the job. His hair graying at the temples. Unlike Cross, his uniform wasn't pristine, wasn't rigidly maintained for appearance's sake. It had the soft wrinkles of a man who spent more time working than polishing his badge. He looked at Cross. Then at Chuck Norris. Then back again. His gaze? Unreadable. Cross's breath was heavy in his chest, every inhale laced with frustration. With the bitter taste of something he refused to name. You need to stop. The senior officer's voice was calm. Even. But there was an edge to it, authority that came not from volume, but from experience. Cross opened his mouth, the instinct to argue, to justify, burning in his throat. But he had no argument. Not a single excuse that would hold up under the weight of what had just happened. And worse, he knew it. A shift passed through the watching crowd. The murmurs were quieter now. Not filled with uncertainty anymore, but with understanding. People had seen it all. They had watched him escalate. Had watched him try to exert control over a man who had never once raised his voice, let alone his fists. And they had watched him fail. A man in the crowd muttered something under his breath. A woman near him nodded. Another held up a phone, still recording. Cross swallowed hard. The senior officer exhaled slowly. Like he had seen this before. Like he had been here before, too many times. With too many men who had let power make them reckless. Then, he spoke again. Give me your badge. The words landed like a blow. Cross's stomach twisted violently. His skin burned with heat. His breath caught between his ribs. His entire world, his entire identity, revolved around the shield pinned to his chest. The authority it granted him. Without it, he was nothing. His hands twitched at his sides. This isn't necessary, he muttered. But the bite was gone from his voice. The senior officer's expression didn't change. Badge and gun. The order was final. There was no room for negotiation. A fresh wave of shame burned through Cross's body. Slowly, stiffly, he reached for the metal pin to his chest. The weight of it felt different now. He had worn it for years, had carried it like armor, believing it made him untouchable. But today, it hadn't protected him at all. With unsteady fingers, he unpinned it and placed it into the senior officer's waiting hand. Then, the gun. This was worse. He had already lost it once today. Had already felt the unbearable humiliation of having it taken from him like a child playing at authority. Now, he had to surrender it by choice. The grip was firm in his palm. The weight, familiar. He hesitated. The senior officer didn't move, didn't rush him. But his meaning was clear. Cross had no choice. With slow, deliberate motions, he removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, and placed the empty weapon atop his badge. The moment it left his hands, something inside him fractured. The senior officer gave a small nod, as if he had expected no less. Then, without another word, he gestured to the younger officer beside him. Escort him out of the park. Cross's jaw locked. He wanted to fight, to resist, to hold on to what was already gone. But there was nothing left to hold. A hand touched his arm. Not rough, not forceful, but firm. The younger officer, one Cross had barely noticed before, stood beside him, waiting for him to move. He did. The walk to the edge of the park? The longest of his life. Every step felt heavier, like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. He could hear the murmurs behind him, could feel the gazes of strangers following his departure. But he kept his head up, refusing to look at them, refusing to acknowledge what they saw. A once powerful man, reduced to nothing. By the time he reached the street, the world felt unfamiliar. The uniform on his body no longer carried the same presence. Without the badge, without the gun, it was just fabric. Just another set of clothes worn by a man who had lost everything. Behind him, the park carried on. The incident? Over. Life? Moving forward without him. And at the center of it all, Chuck Norris, standing exactly as he had before. Unmoved. Unshaken. A man who had never needed power to prove himself. The crowd, once filled with uncertainty, now regarded him with something else entirely. Not just respect, but recognition. For what he was. For what Cross had never been. And as the former officer stepped out of sight, Chuck, without a word, returned to his bench. The pigeons, unconcerned with human affairs, fluttered back to him, pecking at the seeds he scattered with the same quiet patience he had shown from the start. It was over. And as it had always been. Justice had spoken.